The Ghost at Massingham Mansions by Ernest Bramah. "Do you believe in ghosts, Max?" inquired Mr. Carlyle. "Only as ghosts," replied Karados, with decision. "Oh, quite so," assented the private detective, with the air of acquiescence with which he was wont to cloak his moments of obfuscation. Then he added, cautiously, "And how don't you believe in them, pray?" "As public nuisances, or private ones, for that matter," replied his friend. "So long as they are content to behave as ghosts, I am with them. When they begin to meddle with a state of existence that is outside their province, to interfere in business matters and depreciate property, to rattle chains, bang doors, ring bells, predict winners, and to edit magazines, and to attract attention instead of shunning it, I cease to believe. My sympathies are entirely with the sensible old fellow who was awakened in the middle of the night to find a shadowy form standing by the side of his bed and silently regarding him. For a few minutes the disturbed man waited patiently, expecting some awful communication, but the same profound silence was maintained. 'Well,' he remarked at length, 'if you have nothing to do, I have,' and turning over went to sleep again. "I have been asked to take up a ghost," Carlyle began to explain. "Then I don't believe in it," declared Karados. "Why not?" "Because it is a pushful, notoriety-loving ghost, or it would not have gone so far. Probably it wants to get into the Daily Mail. The other people, whoever they are, don't believe in it either, Lewis, or they wouldn't have called you in. They would have gone to Sir Oliver Lodge for an explanation, or to the nearest priest for a stoup of holy water." "Now, I admit that I shall direct my researches towards the forces of this world before I begin to investigate any other," conceded Lewis Carlyle. "And I don't doubt," he added, with his usual bland complacence, "that I shall hail up some mischievous or aggrieved individual before the ghost is many days older. Now that you have brought me so far, do you care to go on round to the place with me, Max, to hear what they have to say about it?" Karados agreed, with his usual good nature. He rarely met his friend without hearing the details of some new case, for Carlyle's practice had increased vastly since the night when chance had led him into the blind man's study. They discussed the cases according to their interest, and there the matter generally ended, so far as Max Carrados was concerned, until he casually heard the result subsequently from Carlyle's lips, or learned the sequel from the newspaper. But these pages are primarily a record of the methods of the one man whose name they bear, and therefore, for the occasional case that Karados completed for his friend, there must be assumed the unchronicled scores which the inquiry agent dealt capably with himself. This reminder is perhaps necessary to dissipate the impression that Lewis Carlyle was a pretentious humbug. He was, as a matter of fact, in spite of his amiable foibles and the self-assurance that was, after all, merely an asset of his trade, a shrewd and capable businessman of his world, and behind his office manner, nothing concerned him more than to pocket fees for which he felt that he had failed to render value. Massingham Mansions proved to be a single block of residential flats overlooking a recreation ground. It was, as they afterwards found, an adjunct to a larger estate of similar property situated down another road. A porter residing in the basement looked after the interests of Massingham Mansions. The business office was placed among the other flats. On that morning it presented the appearance of a well-kept, prosperous enough place, a little dull, a little unfinished, a little depressing perhaps, in fact, faintly reminiscent of the superfluous mansions that stand among broad, weedy roads on the outskirts of overgrown seaside resorts. But it was persistently raining at the time when Mr. Carlyle had his first view of it. "It is early to judge," he remarked, after stopping the car in order to verify the name on the brass plate. "But, upon my word, Max, I really think that our ghost might have discovered more appropriate quarters." At the office, to which the porter had directed them, they found a managing clerk and 2 coltish youths in charge. Mr. Carlyle's name produced an appreciable flutter. "The governor isn't here just now, but I have this matter in hand," said the clerk, with an easy air of responsibility, an effect unfortunately marred by a sudden irrepressible giggle from the least overawed of the colts. "Will you kindly step into our private room?" He turned at the door of the inner office and dropped a freezing eye on the offender. "Get those letters copied before you go out to lunch, Binns," he remarked, in a sufficiently loud voice. Then he closed the door quickly before Binns could find a suitable retort. So far it had been plain sailing, but now, brought face to face with the necessity of explaining, the clerk began to develop some hesitancy in beginning. "It's a funny sort of business," he remarked, skirting the difficulty. "Perhaps," admitted Mr. Carlyle, "but that will not embarrass us. Many of the cases that pass through my hands are what you would call funny sorts of business." "I suppose so," responded the young man, "but not through ours. Well, this is at No. 11 Massingham. A few nights ago, I suppose it must be more than a week now, Willett, the estate porter, was taking up some luggage to No. 75 North Hangar for the people there, when he noticed a light in one of the rooms at 11 Massingham, the back's face, though about 20 or 30 yards away. It struck him as curious, because 11 Massingham is empty and locked up. Naturally, he thought at first that the porter at Massingham, or one of us from the office, had gone up for something. Still, it was so unusual, being late at night, that it was his business to look into it. On his way round, you know where Massingham Mansions are, he had to pass here. It was dark, for we'd all been gone hours, but Willett has duplicate keys, and he let himself in. Then he began to think that something must be wrong, for here, hanging up against their number on the board, were the only 2 keys of 11 Massingham that there are supposed to be. He put the keys in his pocket and went on to Massingham. Green, the resident porter there, told him that he hadn't been into No. 11 for a week. What was more, no one had passed the outer door, in or out, for a good half-hour. He knew that, because the door springs with a noise when it is opened, no matter how carefully. So the 2 of them went up. The door of No. 11 was locked, and inside, everything was as it should be. There was no light then, and after looking well round with the lanterns that they carried, they were satisfied that no one was concealed there. "You say lanterns," interrupted Mr. Carlyle. "I suppose they lit the gas, or whatever it is there, as well?" "It is gas, but they could not light it because it was cut off at the meter. We always cut it off when a flat becomes vacant." "What sort of a light was it, then, that Willett saw?" "It was gas, Mr. Carlyle. It is possible to see the bracket in that room from 75 North Hangar. He saw it burning." "Then the meter had been put on again?" "It is in a locked cupboard in the basement. Only the office and the porters have keys. They tried the gas in the room, and it was dead out. They looked at the meter in the basement afterwards, and it was dead off." "Very good," observed Mr. Carlyle, noting the facts in his pocket-book. "What next?" "Well, the next," continued the clerk, "was something that had really happened before. When they got down again, Green and Willett, Green was rather chipping Willett about seeing the light, you know, when he stopped suddenly. He'd remembered something. The day before, the servant at 12 Massingham had asked him who it was that was using the bathroom at No. 11, she, of course, knowing that it was empty. He told her that no one used the bathroom. "Well," she said, "we hear the water running and splashing almost every night, and it's funny with no one there." He had thought nothing of it at the time, concluding, as he told her, that it must be the water in the bathroom of one of the underneath flats that they heard. Of course, he told Willett then, and they went up again and examined the bathroom more closely. Water had certainly been run there, for the sides of the bath were still wet. They tried the taps, and not a drop came. When a flat is empty, we cut off the water, like the gas. "At the same place? The cupboard in the basement?" inquired Carlyle. "No, at the cistern in the roof. The trap is at the top of the stairs, and you need a longish ladder to get there." The next morning, Willett reported what he'd seen, and the governor told me to look into it. We didn't think much of it so far. That night, I happened to be seeing some friends to the station here. I live not so far off, and I thought I might as well take a turn round here on my way home. I knew that if a light was burning, I should be able to see the window lit up from the yard at the back, although the gas itself would be out of sight. And, sure enough, there was the light blazing out of one of the windows of number 11. I won't say that I didn't feel a bit homesick then, but I'd made up my mind to go up. "Good man," murmured Mr. Carlyle, approvingly. "Wait a bit," recommended the clerk, with a shamefaced laugh. So far I had only had to make my mind up. It was then close on midnight, and not a soul about. I came here for the keys, and I also had the luck to remember an old revolver that had been lying about in a drawer of the office for years. It wasn't loaded, but it didn't seem quite so lonely with it. I put it in my pocket and went on to Massingham, taking another turn into the yard to see that the light was still on. Then I went up the stairs as quietly as I could, and let myself into number 11. "You didn't take Willett or Green with you?" The clerk gave Mr. Carlyle a knowing look, as of one smart man who will be appreciated by another. "Willett's a very trustworthy chap," he replied, "and we have every confidence in him. Green also, although he has not been with us so long. But I thought it just as well to do it on my own, you understand, Mr. Carlyle. You didn't look in at Massingham on your way? Well, if you had, you would have seen that there is a pane of glass above every door, frosted glass to the hall doors, and plain over each of those inside. It's to light the halls and passages, you know. Each flat has a small square hall, and a longish passage leading off it. As soon as I opened the door, I could tell that one of the rooms down the passage was lit up, though I could not see the door of it from there. Then I crept very quietly through the hall into the passage. A regular stream of light was shining from above the end door on the left. The room, I knew, was the smallest in the flat. It's generally used for a servant's bedroom, or sometimes for a box room. It was a bit thick, you'll admit. Right at the end of a long passage, and midnight, and after what the others had said. Yes, assented the inquiry agent. But you went on? I went on, tiptoeing without a sound. I got to the door, took out my pistol, put my hand almost on the handle, and then— Well? Prompted Mr. Carlyle, as the narrator paused provokingly, with the dramatic instinct of an expert raconteur. What then? Then the light went out. While my hand was within an inch of the handle, the light went out, as clean as if I had been watched all along, and the thing timed. It went out all at once, without any warning, and without the slightest sound from the beastly room beyond. And then it was as black as hell in the passage, and something seemed to be going to happen. What did you do? I did a slope, acknowledged the clerk, frankly. I broke all the records down that passage, I bet you. You'll laugh, I dare say, and think you would have stood, but you don't know what it was like. I'd been screwing myself up, wondering what I should see in that lighted room when I opened the door. And then the light went out like a knife, and for all I knew, the next second the door would open on me in the dark, and Christ only knows what come out. Probably I should have run also, conceded Mr. Carlyle, tactfully. And you, Max? You see, I always feel at home in the dark, apologised the blind man. At all events, you got safely away, Mr. My name's Elliot, responded the clerk. Yes, you may bet I did. Whether the door opened, and anybody or anything came out or not, I can't say. I didn't look. I certainly did get the idea that I heard the bath water running and swishing as I snatched at the hall door, but I didn't stop to consider that either, and if it was, the noise was lost in the slam of the door, and my clatter as I took about 12 flights of stairs, 6 steps at a time. Then, when I was safely out, I did venture to go round to look up again. And there was that damned light, full on again. Really? Commented Mr. Carlyle. That was very audacious of him. Him? Oh, well, yes, I suppose so. That's what the governor insists, but he hasn't been up there himself in the dark. Is that as far as you have got? It's as far as we can get. The bally thing goes on just as it likes. The very next day, we tied up the taps of the gas meter and the water cistern and sealed the string. Bless you, it didn't make a ha'porth of difference. Scarcely a night passes without the light showing, and there's no doubt that the water runs. We put copying ink on the door handles and the taps, and got into it ourselves until there isn't a man about the place that you couldn't implicate. Has anyone watched up there? Willett and Green together did one night. They shut themselves up in the room opposite from 10 till 12, and nothing happened. I was watching the window with a pair of opera glasses from an empty flat here, 85 Northanger. Then they chucked it, and before they could have been down the steps, the light was there. I could see the gas, as plain as I can see this inkstand. I ran down and met them coming to tell me that nothing had happened. The 3 of us sprinted up again, and the light was out, and the flat as deserted as a churchyard. What do you make of that? It certainly requires looking into, replied Mr. Carlyle, diplomatically. Looking into? Well, you're welcome to look all day, and all night too, Mr. Carlyle. It isn't as though it was an old baronial mansion, you see, with sliding panels and secret passages. The place has the date over the front door, 1882. 1882 and haunted, by gosh. It was built for what it is, and there isn't an inch unaccounted for between the slates and the foundation. These 2 things, the light and the water running, are the only indications there have been? Asked Mr. Carlyle. So far as we ourselves have seen or heard. I ought perhaps to tell you of something else, however. When this business first started, I made a few casual inquiries here and there among the tenants. Among others, I saw Mr. Belting, who occupies No. 9 Massingham, the flat directly beneath No. 11. It didn't seem any good making up a cock and bull story, so I put it to him plainly. Had he been annoyed by anything unusual going on at the empty flat above? If you mean your confounded ghost up there, I have not been particularly annoyed, he said at once, but Mrs. Belting has, and I should advise you to keep out of her way, at least until she gets another servant. Then he told me that their girl, who slept in the bedroom underneath the little one at No. 11, had been going on about noises in the room above, footsteps and tramping, and a bump on the floor, for some time before we heard anything of it. Then one day she suddenly said that she'd had enough of it, and bolted. That was just before Willett first saw the light. It is being talked about, then, among the tenants? You bet, assented Mr. Elliot, pungently. That's what gets the governor. He wouldn't give a continental if no one knew, but you can't tell where it will end. The people at Northanger don't half like it either. All the children are scared out of their little wits, and none of the slavies will run errands after dark. It'll give the estate a bad name for the next 3 years if it isn't stopped. It shall be stopped, declared Mr. Carlyle, impressively. Of course, we have our methods for dealing with this sort of thing, but in order to make a clean sweep, it is desirable to put our hands on the offender in flagranti delicto. Tell your principal not to have any further concern in the matter. One of my people will call here for any further details that he may require during the day. Just leave everything as it is in the meanwhile. Good morning, Mr. Elliot. Good morning. A fairly obvious game, I imagine, Max, he commented, as they got into the car, although the details are original, and the motive not disclosed as yet. I wonder how many of them are in it. Let me know when you find out, said Karados, and Mr. Carlyle promised. Nearly a week passed, and the expected revelation failed to make its appearance. Then, instead, quite a different note arrived. My dear Max, I wonder if you formed any conclusion of that Massingham Mansions affair from Mr. Elliot's refined narrative of the circumstances. I begin to suspect that Trigget, whom I put on, is somewhat of an ass, though a very remarkable circumstance has come to light which might, if it wasn't a matter of business, offer an explanation of the whole business by stamping it as inexplicable. You know how I value your suggestions. If you happen to be in the neighbourhood, not otherwise, Max, I protest, I should be glad if you would drop in for a chat. Yours sincerely, Lewis Carlyle. Karados smiled at the ingenuous transparency of the note. He had thought several times of the case since the interview with Elliot, chiefly because he was struck by certain details of the manifestation that divided it from the ordinary methods of the bogey-raiser, an aspect that had apparently made no particular impression on his friend. He was sufficiently interested not to let the day pass without happening to be in the neighbourhood of Bampton Street. "Max," exclaimed Mr. Carlyle, raising an accusing forefinger, "you have come on purpose." "If I have," replied the visitor, "you can reward me with a cup of that excellent beverage that you were able to conjure up from somewhere down in the basement on a former occasion. As a matter of fact, I have." Mr. Carlyle transmitted the order, and then demanded his friend's serious attention. "That ghost at Massingham Mansions. I still don't believe in that particular ghost, Lewis," commented Karados, in mild speculation. "I never did, of course," replied Carlyle. "But upon my word, Max, I shall have to very soon, as a precautionary measure. Trigget has been able to do nothing, and now he is as good as gone on strike." "Downed? Now, what on earth can an inquiry man down to go on strike, Lewis? Notebooks? So Trigget has got a chill, like our candid friend Elliot, eh?" "He started all right. Said that he didn't mind spending a night or a week in a haunted flat, and, to do him justice, I don't believe he did at first. Then he came across a very curious piece of forgotten local history, a very remarkable coincidence in the circumstances, Max." "I was wondering," said Karados, "when we should come up against that story, Lewis." "Then you know of it?" exclaimed the inquiry agent, in surprise. "Not at all. Only I guessed it must exist. Here you have the manifestation associated with two things which in themselves are neither unusual nor awe-inspiring, the gas and the water. It requires some association to connect them up, and to give them point and force. That is the story." "Yes," assented his friend. "That is the story, and upon my soul, in the circumstances— well, you shall hear it. It comes partly from the newspapers of many years ago, but only partly, for the circumstances were successfully hushed up in a large measure, and it required the stimulated memories of ancient scandalmongers to fill in the details. Oh, yes, it was a scandal, Max, and would have been a great sensation, too, I do not doubt, only they had no proper pictorial press in those days, poor beggars. It was very soon after Massingham Mansions had been erected. They were called Enderby House in those days, by the way, for the name was changed on account of this very business. The household at number 11 consisted of a comfortable, middle-aged married couple and one servant, a quiet and attractive young creature, one is led to understand. As a matter of fact, I think they were the first tenants of that flat. "The first occupants give the soul to a new house," remarked the blind man gravely. "That is why empty houses have their different characters." "I don't doubt it for a moment," assented Mr. Carlyle in his incisive way. But none of our authorities on this case made any reference to the fact. They did say, however, that the man held a good and responsible position, a position for which high personal character and strict morality were essential. He was also well known and regarded in quiet but substantial local circles, where serious views prevailed. He was, in short, a man of notorious respectability. The first chapter of the tragedy opened with the painful death of the prepossessing handmaiden. Suicide, poor creature. She didn't appear one morning, and the flat was full of the reek of gas. With great promptitude, the master threw all the windows open and called up the porter. They burst open the door of the little bedroom at the end of the passage, and there was the thing as clear as daylight for any coroner's jury to see. The door was locked on the inside, and the extinguished gas was turned full on. It was only a tiny room, with no fireplace, and the ventilation of a closed, well-fitting door and window was negligible in the circumstances. At all events, the girl was proved to have been dead for several hours when they reached her, and the doctor who conducted the autopsy crowned the convincing fabric of circumstances when he mentioned, as delicately as possible, that the girl had a very pressing reason for dreading an inevitable misfortune that would shortly overtake her. The jury returned the obvious verdict. There have been a great many undiscovered crimes in the history of mankind, Max, but it is by no means every ingenious plot that carries. After the inquest, at which our gentleman doubtless cut a very proper and impressive figure, the barbed whisper began to insinuate and to grow in freedom. It is sheerly impossible to judge how these things start, but we know that once they have been begun, they gather material like an avalanche. It was remembered by someone at the flat underneath that late on the fatal night a window in the principal bedroom above had been heard to open, top and bottom, very quietly. Certain other sounds of movement in the night did not tally with the tale of sleep-wrapped innocence. Sceptical busybodies were anxious to demonstrate practically, to those who differed from them on this question, that it was quite easy to extinguish a gas jet in one room by blowing down the gas pipe in another. And in this connection there was evidence that the lady of the flat had spoken to her friends more than once of her sentimental young servant's extravagant habit of reading herself to sleep occasionally with the light full on. Why was nothing heard at the inquest, they demanded, of the curious fact that an open novelette lay on the counterpane when the room was broken into? 100 trifling circumstances were adduced, arrangements that the girl had been making for the future, down to the last evening of her life, interpretable hints that she had dropped to her acquaintances, her views on suicide and the best means to that end, a favourite topic, it would seem, among her class, her possession of certain comparatively expensive trinkets on a salary of a very few shillings a week, and so on. Finally, some rather more definite and important piece of evidence must have been conveyed to the authorities, for we know now that one fine day a warrant was issued. Somehow, rumour preceded its execution. The eminently respectable gentleman with whom it was concerned did not wait to argue out the merits of the case. He locked himself in the bathroom, and when the police arrived, they found that instead of an arrest, they had to arrange the details for another inquest. "A very convincing episode," conceded Karados, in response to his friend's expectant air. "And now her spirit passes the long winter evenings, turning the gas on and off, and the one amusement of his consists in doing the same with the bath-water. Or the other way. The other way about, Lewis. Truly, one half the world knows not how the other half lives. All your cheap humour won't induce Trigget to spend another night in that flat, Max, retorted Mr. Carlyle. Nor, I am afraid, will it help me through this business in any other way. Then I'll give you a hint that may, said Karados. Try your respectable gentleman's way of settling difficulties. What is that? Demanded his friend. Blow down the pipes, Lewis. Blow down the pipes? Repeated Carlyle. At all events, try it. I infer that Mr. Trigget has not experimented in that direction. But what will it do, Max? Possibly it will demonstrate where the other end goes to. But the other end goes to the meter. I suggest not. Not without some interference with its progress. I have already met your Mr. Trigget, you know, Lewis. An excellent and reliable man, within his limits, but he is at his best posted outside the door of an hotel, waiting to see the correspondent go in. He hasn't enough imagination for this case, not enough to carry him away from what would be his own obvious method of doing it, to what is someone else's, equally obvious, but quite different method. Unless I am doing him an injustice, he will have spent most of his time trying to catch someone getting into the flat to turn the gas and water on and off, whereas I conjecture that no one does go into the flat, because it is perfectly simple, ingenious but simple, to produce these phenomena without. Then, when Mr. Trigget has satisfied himself that it is physically impossible for anyone to be going in and out, and when, on the top of it, he comes across this romantic tragedy, a tale that might psychologically explain the ghost, simply because the ghost is moulded on the tragedy, then, of course, Mr. Trigget's mental process is swept away from its moorings, and his feet begin to get cold. That is very curious and suggestive, said Mr. Carlyle. I certainly assumed. But shall we have Trigget up and question him on the point? I think he ought to be here now, if he isn't detained at the Bull. Karados assented, and in a few minutes Mr. Trigget presented himself at the door of the private office. He was a melancholy-looking, middle-aged little man, with an ineradicable air of being exactly what he was, and the searcher for deeper or subtler indications of character would only be rewarded by a latent pessimism, grounded on the depressing probability that he would never be anything else. "Come in, Trigget," called out Mr. Carlyle, when his employee diffidently appeared. "Come in. Mr. Karados would like to hear some of the details of the Massingham Mansions case." "Not the first time I have availed myself of the benefit of your inquiries, Mr. Trigget," nodded the blind man. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, sir," replied Trigget, with gloomy deference. "It's very handsome of you to put it in that way, Mr. Karados, sir. But this isn't another Tarpley Templeton case, if I may say so, sir. That was as plain as a pikestaff, after all, sir." "When we saw the pikestaff, Mr. Trigget, yes, it was," admitted Karados, with a smile. "But this is insoluble? Ah, well. When I was a boy, I used to be extraordinarily fond of ghost stories, I remember. But even while reading them, I always had an uneasy suspicion that when it came to the necessary detail of explaining the mystery, I should be defrauded with some subterfuge, as, by an ingenious arrangement of hidden wires, the artful muggles had contrived, etc., or an optical illusion effected by means of concealed mirrors revealed the modus operandi of the apparition. I thought that I had been swindled. I think so still. I hope there are no ingenious wires or concealed mirrors here, Mr. Trigget." Mr. Trigget looked mildly sagacious, but hopelessly puzzled. It was his misfortune that in him the necessities of his business and the proclivities of his nature were at variance, so that he ordinarily presented the curious anomaly of looking equally alert and tired. "Wires, sir?" he began, with faint amusement. "Not only wires, but anything that might account for what is going on," interposed Mr. Carlyle. "Mr. Karados means this, Trigget. You have reported that it is impossible for anyone to be concealed in the flat, or to have secret access to it." "I have tested every inch of space in all the rooms, Mr. Karados, sir," protested the hurt Trigget. "I have examined every board, and, you may say, every nail in the floor, the skirting boards, the window frames, and, in fact, wherever a board or a nail exists. There are no secret ways in or out. Then I have taken the most elaborate precautions against the doors and windows being used for surreptitious ingress and egress. They have not been used, sir. For the past week I am the only person who has been in and out of the flat, Mr. Karados. And yet night after night the gas that is cut off at the meter is lit and turned out again, and the water that is cut off at the cistern splashes about in the bath up to the second I let myself in. Then it's as quiet as the grave, and everything is exactly as I left it. It isn't human, Mr. Karados, sir, and flesh and blood can't stand it. Not in the middle of the night, that is to say." "You see nothing further, Mr. Trigget?" "I don't indeed, Mr. Karados. I would suggest doing away with the gas in that room altogether. As a box room it wouldn't need one." "And the bathroom?" "That might be turned into a small bedroom, and all the water fittings removed. Then, to provide a bathroom—" "Yes, yes," interrupted Mr. Carlyle impatiently. "But we are retained to discover who is causing this annoyance, and to detect the means, not to suggest structural alterations in the flat, Trigget. The fact is that, after having put in a week on this job, you have failed to bring us an inch nearer its solution. Now, Mr. Karados has suggested—" Mr. Carlyle was not usually detained among the finer shades of humour, but some appreciation of the grotesqueness of the advice required him to control his voice as he put the matter in its baldest form. "Mr. Karados has suggested that instead of spending the time measuring the chimneys and listening to the wallpaper, if you had simply blown down the gas pipe—" Karados was inclined to laugh, although he thought it rather too bad of Lewis. "Not quite in those terms, Mr. Trigget," he interposed. "Blow down the gas pipe, sir?" repeated the amazed man. "What for?" "To ascertain where the other end comes out," replied Carlyle. "But don't you see, sir, that is a detail until you ascertain how it is being done? The pipe may be tapped between the bath and the cistern. Naturally, I considered that. As a matter of fact, the water pipe isn't tapped. It goes straight up from the bath to the cistern in the attic above, a distance of only a few feet, and I have examined it. The gas pipe, it is true, passes through a number of flats, and without pulling up all the floors, it isn't practicable to trace it. But how does that help us, Mr. Karados? The gas tap has to be turned on and off. You can't do that with these hidden wires. It has to be lit. I've never heard of lighting gas by optical illusions, sir. Somebody must get in and out of the flat, or else it isn't human. I've spent a week, a very trying week, sir, in endeavouring to ascertain how it could be done. I haven't shirked cold and wet and solitude, sir, in the discharge of my duty. I've freely placed my poor gifts of observation and intelligence, such as they are, at the service—" "Not freely, Trigget," interposed his employer with decision. "I am speaking under a deep sense of injury, Mr. Carlyle," retorted Mr. Trigget, who, having had time to think it over, had now come to the conclusion that he was not appreciated. "I am alluding to a moral attitude, such as we all possess. I am very grieved by what has been suggested. I didn't expect it of you, Mr. Carlyle, sir. Indeed, I did not. For a week I have done everything that it has been possible to do. Everything that a long experience could suggest. And now, as I understand it, sir, you complain that I didn't blow down the gas pipe, sir. It's hard, sir. It's very hard." "Oh, well, for heaven's sake don't cry about it, Triggett," exclaimed Mr. Carlyle. "You're always sobbing about the place over something or other. We know you did your best. God help you," he added aside. "I did, Mr. Carlyle. Indeed I did, sir. And I thank you for that appreciative tribute to my services. I value it highly, very highly indeed, sir." A tremulous note in the rather impassioned delivery made it increasingly plain that Mr. Triggett's regimen had not been confined entirely to solid food that day. His wrongs were forgotten, and he approached Mr. Karados with an engaging air of secrecy. "What is this tip about blowing down the gas pipe, sir?" he whispered confidentially. "The old dog's always willing to learn something new." "Max," said Mr. Carlyle curtly, "is there anything more that we need detain Triggett for?" "Just this," replied Karados, after a moment's thought. "The gas bracket. It has a mantle attachment on." "Oh, no, Mr. Karados," confided the old dog, with the affectation of imparting rather valuable information. "Not a mantle on. Oh, no, certainly no mantle. Indeed not a mantle at all." Mr. Carlyle looked at his friend curiously. It was half evident that something might have miscarried. Furthermore, it was obvious that the warmth of the room and the stress of emotion were beginning to have a disastrous effect on the level of Mr. Triggett's ideas and speech. "A globe?" suggested Karados. "A globe? No, sir, not even a globe, in the strict sense of the word. No globe, that is to say, Mr. Karados. In fact, nothing like a globe." "What is there, then?" demanded the blind man, without any break in his unruffled patience. "There may be another way, but surely there must be some attachment." "No," said Mr. Triggett, with precision. "No attachment at all. Nothing at all. Nothing whatsoever. Just the ordinary or common or penny plain gas jet, and above it the what you may call it thingamabob." "The shade. Gas consumer, of course," exclaimed Karados. "That is it." "The tin thingamabob," insisted Mr. Triggett, with slow dignity. "Call it what you will. Its purpose is self-evident. It acts as a disparator, a distributor, that is to say." "Lewis," struck in Karados joyously, "are you good for settling it tonight?" "Certainly, my dear fellow, if you can really give the time." "Good. It's years since I last tackled a ghost. What about—" His look indicated the other member of the council. "Would he be of any assistance?" "Perhaps, then." "What time?" "Say 11:30. "Triggett," rapped out his employer sharply, "meet us at the corner of Middlewood and Enderby Roads at 11:30 sharp tonight. If you can't manage it, I shall not require your services again." "Certainly, sir. I shall not fail to be punctual," replied Triggett without a tremor. The appearance of an almost incredible sobriety had possessed him in the face of warning, and both in speech and manner he was again exactly the man as he had entered the room. "I regard it as a great honour, Mr. Karados, to be associated with you in this business, sir." "In the meanwhile," remarked Karados, "if you find the time hang heavy on your hands, you might look up the subject of platinum black. It may be the new tip you want." "Certainly, sir. But do you mind giving me a hint as to what platinum black is?" "It is a chemical that has the remarkable property of igniting hydrogen or coal gas by mere contact," replied Karados. "Think how useful that may be if you haven't got a match." To mark the happy occasion, Mr. Carlyle had insisted on taking his friend off to witness a popular musical comedy. Karados had a few preparations to make, a few accessories to procure for the night's work, but the whole business had come within the compass of an hour, and the theatre spanned the interval between dinner at the Palm Tree and the time when they left the car at the appointed meeting place. Mr. Trigget was already there, in an irreproachable state of normal dejection. Parkinson accompanied the party, bringing with him the baggage of the expedition. "Anything going on, Trigget?" inquired Mr. Carlyle. "I've made a turn round the place, sir, and the light was on," was the reply. "I didn't go up, for fear of disturbing the conditions before you saw them. That was about 10 minutes ago. Are you going into the yard to look again? I have all the keys, of course." "Do we, Max?" queried Mr. Carlyle. "Mr. Trigget might. We need not all go. He can catch us up again." He caught them up again before they had reached the outer door. "It's still on, sir," he reported. "Do we use any special caution, Max?" asked Carlyle. "Oh, no. Just as though we were friends of the ghost, calling in the ordinary way." Trigget, who retained the keys, preceded the party up the stairs till the top was reached. He stood a moment at the door of number 11, examining by the light of the electric lamp he carried his private marks there, and pointing out to the others in a whisper that they had not been tampered with. All at once, a most dismal wail, lingering, piercing, and ending in something like a sob that died away because the life that gave it utterance had died with it, drawled forebodingly through the echoing emptiness of the deserted flat. Trigget had just snapped off his light, and in the darkness a startled exclamation sprang from Mr. Carlyle's lips. "It's all right, sir," said the little man, with a private satisfaction that he had the diplomacy to conceal. "Bit creepy, isn't it, especially when you hear it by yourself up here for the first time? It's only the end of the bath water running out." He had opened the door, and was conducting them to the room at the end of the passage. A faint aurora had been visible from that direction when they first entered the hall, but it was cut off before they could identify its source. "That's what happens," muttered Trigget. He threw open the bedroom door without waiting to examine his marks there, and they crowded into the tiny chamber. Under the beams of the lamps they carried, it was brilliantly, though erratically, illuminated. All turned towards the central object of their quest, a tarnished gas bracket of the plainest description. A few inches above it hung the metal disc that Trigget had alluded to, for the ceiling was low, and at that point it was brought even nearer to the gas by corresponding with the slant of the roof outside. With the prescience so habitual with him that it had ceased to cause remark among his associates, Karados walked straight to the gas bracket and touched the burner. "Still warm," he remarked. "And so are we getting now. A thoroughly material ghost, you perceive, Lewis." "But still turned off, don't you see, Mr. Karados, sir?" put in Trigget eagerly. "And yet no one's passed out." "Still turned off, and still turned on," commented the blind man. "What do you mean, Max?" "The small screwdriver, Parkinson," requested Karados. "Well, upon my word," dropped Mr. Carlyle, expressively. For in no longer time than it takes to record the fact, Max Carrados had removed a screw and then knocked out the tap. He held it up towards them, and they all at once saw that so much of the metal had been filed away that the gas passed through, no matter how the tap stood. "How on earth did you know of that?" "Because it wasn't practicable to do the thing in any other way. Now, unhook the shade, Parkinson, carefully." The warning was not altogether unnecessary, for the man had to stand on tiptoes before he could comply. Karados received the dingy metal cone and lightly touched its inner surface. "Ah, here, at the apex, to be sure," he remarked. "The gas is bound to get there, and there, Lewis, you have an ever-lit, and yet a truly safety match, so far as gas is concerned, You can buy the thing for £1, I believe." Mr. Carlyle was examining the tiny apparatus with interest. So small that it might have passed for the mummy of a midget hanging from a cobweb, it appeared to consist of an insignificant black pellet and an inch of the finest wire. I've never heard of it. And this will really light the gas?" "As often as you like. That is the whole bag of tricks." Mr. Carlyle turned a censorious eye upon his lieutenant, but Trigget was equal to the occasion, and met it without embarrassment. "I hadn't heard of it either, sir," he remarked conversationally. "Gracious, what won't they be getting out next, Mr. Carlyle?" Now for the mystery of the water. Karados was finding his way to the bathroom, and they followed him down the passage and across the hall. In its way, I think that this is really more ingenious than the gas, for, as Mr. Trigget has proved for us, the water does not come from the cistern. The taps, you perceive, are absolutely dry. "It is forced up?" suggested Mr. Carlyle, nodding towards the outlet. "That is the obvious alternative. We will test it presently." The blind man was down on his hands and knees, following the lines of the different pipes. 2 degrees more cold are not conclusive, because, in any case, the water had gone out that way. Mr. Trigget, you know the ropes. Will you be so obliging as to go up to the cistern and turn the water on?" "I shall need a ladder, sir." "Parkinson?" "We have a folding ladder out here," said Parkinson, touching Mr. Trigget's arm. "One moment," interposed Karados, rising from his investigation among the pipes. "This requires some care. I want you to do it without making a sound or showing a light, if that is possible. Parkinson will help you. Wait until you hear us raising a diversion at the other end of the flat. Come, Lewis." The diversion took the form of tapping the wall and skirting board in the other haunted room. When Trigget presented himself to report that the water was now on, Karados put him to continue the singular exercise with Mr. Carlyle, while he himself slipped back to the bathroom. "The pump, Parkinson," he commanded in a brisk whisper to his man, who was waiting in the hall. The appliance was not unlike a powerful tire pump, with some modifications. One tube from it was quickly fitted to the outlet pipe of the bath. Another trailed a loose end into the bath itself, ready to take up the water. There were a few other details, the work of moments. Then Karados turned on the tap, silencing the inflow by the attachment of short lengths of rubber tube. When the water had risen a few inches, he slipped off to the other room, told his rather mystified confederates there that he wanted a little more noise and bustle put into their performance, and was back again in the bathroom. "Now, Parkinson," he directed, and turned off the tap. There was about a foot of water in the bath. Parkinson stood on the broad base of the pump and tried to drive down the handle. It scarcely moved. "Harder," urged Karados, interpreting every detail of sound with perfect accuracy. Parkinson set his teeth and lunged again. Again he seemed to come up against a solid wall of resistance. "Keep trying. Something must give," said his master encouragingly. "Here, let me." He threw his weight into the balance, and for a moment they hung like a group poised before action. Then, somewhere, something did give, and the sheathing plunger drew. "Now, like blazes, till the bath is empty. Then you can tell the others to stop hammering." Parkinson, looking round to acquiesce, found himself alone, for with silent step and quickened senses, Karados was already passing down the dark flights of the broad stone stairway. It was perhaps 3 minutes later, when an excited gentleman, in the state of disrobement that is tacitly regarded as falling upon the punctum secum in times of fire, flood, and nocturnal emergency, shot out of the door of number 7, and, bounding up the intervening flights of steps, pounded with the knocker on the door of number 9. As someone did not appear with the instantaneity of a jack-in-the-box, he proceeded to repeat the summons, interspersing it with an occasional "I say!" shouted through the letterbox. The light above the door made it unconvincing to affect that no one was at home. The gentleman at the door trumpeted the fact through his channel of communication, and demanded instant attention. So immersed was he with his own grievance, in fact, that he failed to notice the approach of someone on the other side, and the sudden opening of the door, when it did take place, surprised him on his knees at his neighbour's doorstep, a large and consequential-looking personage, as revealed in the light from the hall, wearing the silk hat that he had instinctively snatched up, but with his braces hanging down. "Mr. Tupworthy of number 7, isn't it?" quickly interposed the new man, before his visitor could speak. "But why this homage? Permit me to raise you, sir." "Confound it all!" snorted Mr. Tupworthy indignantly. "You're flooding my flat. The water's coming through my bathroom ceiling in bucketfuls. The plaster'll fall next. Can't you stop it? Has a pipe burst or something?" "Something, I imagine," replied number 9 with serene detachment. "At all events, it appears to be over now." "So I should hope," was the irate retort. "It's bad enough as it is. I shall go round to the office and complain. I'll tell you what it is, Mr. Belting. These mansions are becoming a pandemonium, sir, a veritable pandemonium." "Capital idea. We'll go together and complain. 2 will be more effective," suggested Mr. Belting. "But not tonight, Mr. Tupworthy. We should not find anyone there. The office will be closed. Say tomorrow." "I had no intention of anything so preposterous as going there tonight. I am in no condition to go. If I don't get my feet into hot water at once, I shall be laid up with a severe cold. Doubtless you haven't noticed it, but I am wet through to the skin. Saturated, sir." Mr. Belting shook his head, sagely. "Always a mistake to try to stop water coming through the ceiling," he remarked. "It will come, you know. Finds its own level and all that." "I did not try to stop it. At least, not voluntarily. A temporary emergency necessitated a slight rearrangement of our accommodation. I tell you this in confidence. I was sleeping in the bathroom." At the revelation of so notable a catastrophe, Mr. Belting actually seemed to stagger. Possibly his eyes filled with tears. Certainly he had to turn and wipe away his emotion before he could proceed. Not right under it," he whispered. "I imagine so," replied Mr. Tupworthy. "I do not conceive that I could have been placed more centrally. I received the full cataract in the region of the ear. Well, if I may rely on you that it has stopped, I will terminate our interview for the present." "Good night," responded the still tremulous Belting. "Good night, or good morning, to be exact." He waited, with the door open, to light the first flight of stairs for Mr. Tupworthy's descent. Before the door was closed, another figure stepped down quietly from the obscurity of the steps leading upwards. "Mr. Belting, I believe," said the stranger. "My name is Karados. I have been looking over the flat above. Can you spare me a few minutes?" "What, Mr. Max Carrados?" "The same," smiled the owner of the name. "Come in, Mr. Karados," exclaimed Belting, not only without embarrassment, but with positive affection in his voice. "Come in, by all means. I've heard of you more than once. Delighted to meet you. This way. I know. He put a hand on his guest's arm, and insisted on steering his course until he deposited him in an easy-chair before a fire. "This looks like being a great night. What will you have?" Karados put the suggestion aside, and raised a corner of the situation. "I am afraid that I don't come altogether as a friend," he hinted. "It's no good," replied his host. "I can't regard you in any other light after this. You heard Tupworthy, but you haven't seen the man, Mr. Carados. I know, I've heard, but no wealth of the imagination can ever really quite reconstruct Tupworthy, the shoddy magnifico, in his immense porcine complacency, his monumental self-importance. And sleeping right underneath. Gods, but we have lived tonight. Why ever did you stop?" "You associate me with this business?" "Associate you? My dear Mr. Carados, I give you the full, glorious credit for the one entirely successful piece of low comedy humour in real life that I have ever encountered. Indeed, in a legal and pecuniary sense, I hold you absolutely responsible." "Oh," exclaimed Karados, beginning to laugh quietly. Then he continued, "I think that I shall come through that all right. I shall refer you to Mr. Carlyle, the private inquiry agent, and he will doubtless pass you on to your landlord, for whom he is acting. And I imagine that he, in turn, will throw all the responsibility on the ingenious gentleman who has put them to so much trouble. Can you guess the result of my investigation in the flat above?" "Guess, Mr. Carados? I don't need to guess. I know. You don't suppose I thought for a moment that such transparent devices as 2 intercepted pipes and an automatic gaslighter would impose on a man of intelligence? They were only contrived to mystify the credulous imagination of clerks and porters." "You admit it, then?" "Admit? Good gracious, of course I admit it, Mr. Carados. What's the use of denying it?" "Precisely. I am glad you see that. And yet you seem far from being a mere practical joker. Does your confidence extend to the length of letting me into your object?" "Between ourselves," replied Mr. Belting, "I haven't the least objection, but I wish that you would have, say, a cup of coffee. Mrs. Belting is still up, I believe. She would be charmed to have the opportunity. No? Well, just as you like. Now, my object. You must understand, Mr. Carados, that I am a man of sufficient leisure and adequate means for the small position we maintain. But I am not unoccupied, not idle. On the contrary, I am always busy. I don't approve of any man passing his time aimlessly. I have a number of interests in life, hobbies, if you like. You should appreciate that, as you are a private criminologist. I am, among other things, which don't concern us now, a private retributionist. On every side, people are becoming far too careless and negligent. An era of irresponsibility has set in. Nobody troubles to keep his word, to carry out literally his undertakings. In my small way, I try to set that right by showing them the logical development of their ways. I am, in fact, the sworn enemy of anything approaching sloppiness. You smile at that?" "It is a point of view," replied Karados. "I was wondering how the phrase 'at this moment' would convey itself, say, to Mr. Tupworthy's ear." Mr. Belting doubled up. "But don't remind me of Tupworthy, or I can't get on," he said. "In my method, I follow the system of Herbert Spencer towards children. Of course, you are familiar with his treatise on education. If a rough boy persists, after warnings, in tearing or soiling all his clothes, don't scold him for what, after all, is only a natural and healthy instinct overdone. But equally, of course, don't punish yourself by buying him other clothes. When the time comes for the children to be taken to an entertainment, little Tommy cannot go with them. It would not be seemly, and he is too ashamed to go in rags. He begins to see the force of practical logic. Very well. If a tradesman promises explicitly delivery of his goods by a certain time, and he fails, he finds that he is then unable to leave them. I pay on delivery, by the way. If a man undertakes to make me an article like another, I am painstaking, Mr. Carados. I point out at the time exactly like I want it, and it is, as it generally is, on completion, something quite different. I decline to be easy-going and to be put off with it. I take the simplest and most obvious instances. I could multiply indefinitely. It is, of course, frequently inconvenient to me, but it establishes a standard. "I see that you are a dangerous man, Mr. Belting," remarked Karados. "If most men were like you, our national character would be undermined. People would have to behave properly." "If most men were like me, we should constitute an intolerable nuisance," replied Belting seriously. "A necessary reaction towards sloppiness would set in, and find me at its head. I am always with minorities." "And the case in point?" "The present trouble centres round the kitchen sink. It is cracked and leaks. A trivial cause for so elaborate an outcome, you may say, but you will doubtless remember that 2 men quarrelling once at a spring as to who should use it first involved half Europe in a war, and the whole tragedy of Lear sprang from a silly business round a word. I hadn't noticed the sink when we took this flat, but the landlord had solemnly sworn to do everything that was necessary. Is a new sink necessary to replace the cracked one? Obviously. Well, you know what landlords are. Possibly you are one yourself. They promise you heaven until you've signed the agreement, and then they tell you to go to hell. Suggested that we'd probably broken the sink ourselves, and would certainly be looked to replace it. An excellent servant caught a cold, standing in the drip, and left. Was I to be driven into paying for a new sink myself? Very well, I thought. If the reasonable complaint of one tenant is nothing to you, see how you like the unreasonable complaints of 50. The method served a useful purpose, too. When Mrs. Belting heard that old tale about the tragedy at No. 11, she was terribly upset, vowed that she couldn't stay alone in here at night on any consideration. "My dear," I said, "don't worry yourself about ghosts. I'll make as good a one as ever lived, and then when you see how it takes other people in, just remember next time you hear of another that someone's pulling the string. And I really don't think that she'll ever be afraid of ghosts again." "Thank you," said Karados, rising. "Altogether, I have spent a very entertaining evening, Mr. Belting. I hope your retaliatory method won't get you into serious trouble this time." "Why should it?" demanded Belting quickly. "Oh, well, tenants are complaining. The property is being depreciated. The landlord may think that he has legal redress against you." "But surely I am at liberty to light the gas or use the bath in my own flat, when and how I like." A curious look had come into Mr. Belting's smiling face. A curious note must have sounded in his voice. Karados was warned, and, being warned, guessed. "You are a wonderful man," he said, with upraised hand. "I capitulate. Tell me how it is, won't you?" I knew the man at 11. His tenancy isn't really up till March, but he got an appointment in the north and had to go. His 2 unexpired months weren't worth troubling about, so I got him to sublet the flat to me, all quite regularly, for a nominal consideration, and not to mention it. "But he gave up the keys?" "No, he left them in the door, and the porter took them away. Very unwarrantable of him. Surely I can keep my keys where I like. However, as I had another— Really, Mr. Karados, you hardly imagine that unless I had an absolute right to be there, I should penetrate into a flat, tamper with the gas and water, knock the place about, tramp up and down." "I go," said Karados, "to get our people out in haste. Good night." "Good night, Mr. Karados. It's been a great privilege to meet you. Sorry I can't persuade you." You've been listening to a bite-sized audiobook, read by Simon Stanhope. For more stories like this, please try the links below, and do click subscribe. and hit the bell to hear about future uploads. You may also be interested in becoming a channel member. There are a few options available with various benefits. Click the Join button to find out more. This recording is copyright Bitesized Audio 2021. Thank you for listening.